Kia ora everyone, my name's Zach, I love rugby. Welcome back to Hakatime Rugby. Finally, this quarterfinal is upon us, guys. Huge occasion. To me, this is the biggest game in rugby union in the last 4 years. We knew that the World Cup draw put some kind of weird positions for 4 best teams on one side of the draw, that only 2 would go through, and I think a lot of people predicted that this would be one of the quarterfinals. Ireland versus New Zealand, number 1 in the world, versus the All Blacks. In what is do or die rugby now, guys, this is as big as it gets. I'm going to give you a full preview now of the game, some of the relevant factors, a lot of the build-up, and the teams and the key areas for victory. I'm also going to give you my prediction on who wins this game. Let's get straight into it, guys. Now, the first thing I want to touch on is probability. And I want to look at that from the perspective of what I think the common perspective is around, who's the favorites here and what I think the actual perspective should be. The first thing around the life probability. Now, 60% Ireland, 40% All Blacks. I think that's the common perception here of, in terms of Ireland's favoritism. And don't get me wrong, Ireland are favorites for sure. They're the most consistent team in the world. They're on a 17-match win streak, number 1 team in the world. They've beaten all comers in this World Cup cycle, so they deserve to be favorites. But I think what's happening in these conversations is the All Blacks are being underrated, if I'm honest with you, and I can see why. Ian Foster has set a number of firsts in this World Cup cycle for the wrong reasons. First All Blacks team to lose a pool match, right? So there's just a number of historical elements here that are, in a negative context for Ian Foster's All Blacks. What I will say, and why I think it's closer than people think, is that the All Blacks finally have what is close to, or probably is, their number 123. Particularly in the forward pack. I think that's going to be really telling when we look at the team selections, because the makeup of that forward pack has the best balance of any All Blacks forward pack that we've seen in this 4-year cycle. They've had big moments as well. Obviously, Ellis Park victory, beating the Springboks this year as well, where that forward pack has stood up, and that forward pack is available, and that forward pack is ready to go in this quarterfinal. So, well, the history over this World Cup cycle is probably the correct way to look at this life probability. I actually think it's a lot closer to that. I think it's the voting here of 53%, 47% is where I see this match. This is a lot closer than people think, but I do think it could go either way in terms of the results. So the All Blacks could win. Ireland could win this one with a grinding out of victory here on solid defense and game management and taking points when they're on offer. Either team could win in a blowout victory, but I think this better represents the probability of these two teams going into this match. What I want to look at as well is head-to-head meetings. So the last World Cup cycle, 4 years, there's been 5 games. Ireland have won 3. The All Blacks have won 2. Now, what we all know and what is very, very interesting is obviously the New Zealand tour, right? A lot made on that one. Now, when I went through that New Zealand tour, and I remember reviewing a lot of those games, I thought the All Blacks would win it because it is difficult to win in New Zealand. And when the All Blacks won that first game, it just seemed like the All Blacks, while Ireland were extremely competitive, I still thought there were a number of, successes that they had in that first game, which could be really telling in sort of future games in that series. I expected the All Blacks to win 2 games to 1. Ireland, to their credit, they lose game 1 and they come back and win 2 games. In New Zealand, down by 1 game, they win the last 2 games to win the series. To me, that underscores your World Cup credentials. If you're able to go to New Zealand and win, that's huge. If you're able to go to New Zealand and win after being 1-0 down, that's something else, right? So while a lot of people make, these points around, the quarterfinal curse, to me that curse was put to bed when Ireland did that in New Zealand. Not just winning the series, but winning from 1-0 down. That shows a resolve for a team to win the big moments when it matters. And not just do it once, but do it twice. And that's something you need in World Cups, right? The ability to operate under the biggest pressure and to execute under that pressure. To me, that underscored Ireland's World Cup credentials. And to me, that told me that this team can win the Rugby World Cup. For sure, and should be favourites, rightfully so. Now, the All Blacks have spoken about revenge for that series, right? A lot of All Blacks fans are relishing the opportunity to get that one back, and all the right rhetoric is being spoken about, because I do think, there's inspiration that you can draw on and that the All Blacks themselves are drawing on. And we know that when the All Blacks do that, they can come out with ferocity, that we see only in a few instances, but they come out with real ferocious intent. They win the physical exchanges and they put teams away. And that is a potential outcome of this game, guys. And if they really draw on the inspiration of that losing series at home, and this is an opportunity to get one back on the biggest stage, that could be a potential outcome. But I think equally Ireland have, cause for, let's say, pulling on some of those previous results. If we look back at the last Rugby World Cup, the All Blacks with a statement performance, 46 points to 14. Ireland were number one in the world at that stage as well. But what we saw was the All Blacks completely dominate in that game. And I think a lot of the Irish players will be looking back at that as well and saying, that's one I'd like to get back. So I don't make anything about the quarterfinal curse. I do put a lot of weight on the series win in New Zealand. I think there are motivating factors that it can give to the All Blacks, but I equally think that Ireland have motivation themselves for getting that one back in the quarterfinal. I thought it was just a really interesting perspective going into this, and I'm just going to challenge some of the narratives as we discuss, because I'm trying to separate myth from fact, and I think in the end, both of these teams are equally motivated to go out and do a job in this game. Let's start looking at the lineups, guys. We'll start with the front row, and in particular the scrum. I'm going to go through the team selections. I'm going to identify a number of key areas in the team selections that will be telling components for how this game will be won. And I'm going to tell you who I think is likely to gain an advantage in that area of the game. Start with the front row. We'll start with the scrum. Now, we know that the Irish scrum is very, very good. Tadhg Furlong, fantastic. Andrew Porter, probably one of the top two players for me in Ireland. I think he's fantastic. He's a real warrior with a high work rate and plays big minutes. He sets the tone for this forward pack as well in the set piece, and that's somewhat of a talismanic leadership style. It is that you're able to do your job very effectively and be trusted to go forward, right? That's what he brings, and he does it over a long period in the game. A lot will be made about this Irish scrum. And we've seen a couple of interesting data points against South Africa. They were under pressure, but they did win a couple of big moments. We saw against Scotland, they were dominant. We've seen them dominant against other teams. So I think on balance, people will look at this Irish scrum and say they should be the better. And, in some respects, you can say rightfully so. But we have seen this young forward pack of Ethan de Groot, Tyrell Lomax really come on under fire in Ellis Park when they were first selected, and get an ascendancy against the Springboks a number of times. This is an underrated All Black scrum, I think, by global media standards and by the general public. And I actually expect, and you guys might call me crazy, but I think the All Blacks are going to have the slight advantage at the scrum time. Right? I still expect Ireland will get their moments, much like they did against the Springboks. And in fact, it's going to be an extremely tight tussle, so I don't expect any sort of blowout victories and scrum penalties. I think it could go either way, but I do think the slight edge here I give to the All Blacks, because I've seen these three guys perform under extreme pressure, in an environment where Ian Foster's job was on the line in Ellis Park where no one gave them a chance. So I think that's a galvanizing moment for the All Blacks. I think it's a confidence builder for these young front rowers, and I think it's enough to give the All Blacks the slight edge in the scrum. But we'll keep an eye on that, and as I say, it's only a slight advantage. The line-out. Now, Ireland struggled against South Africa, but Ireland dominated against Scotland, and Scotland has a good line-out. I expect more the Scottish version of the Irish line-out to be at play here. I expect them to be very, very good, right? On the other side, we have Brodie Retallick, Scott Barrett, even Shannon Frizzell to a degree in the line-out. The All Blacks have a very good line-out as well, right? So these are some experienced players on display here. Brodie Retallick, Scott Barrett, Tadhg Byrne, very, very experienced players. If I was to select, as I say, we've seen two data points here from Ireland. We've seen New Zealand line-out be generally pretty good throughout this tournament and in the lead-up here as well. If I was to lean any way, I'd probably split the honours or maybe slight edge here to the All Blacks, but it's only slight. I think either team can get an ascendancy. I think both lineouts are very good. I just get the sense that Scott Barrett taking a bit more ownership on the lineout. He's had really good successes in that this last 12 months or so. I think the All Blacks could have a slight, very, very slight advantage there. The breakdown. Now, without a doubt, Ireland has the advantage at the breakdown. They have the fastest ruck speed, as we know, when recycling the ball into their attacking cohesive patterns. They play at real pace. They've got some super athletes here in the likes of Josh van der Fleer, who plays big minutes, Caelan Doris as well. Super athletes, very well drilled, and very technically proficient when it comes to the breakdown work. It's really interesting seeing how the from tackle to jackling works in this Irish team. You'll sort of see the tackler go down, but the man is over so either very, very quick or very, very late. And their ability to decide, do I go in early or do I go in late, is super impressive. Because what we'll see is, one player will come in to try and clear the ball out, will be cleared out and be focused on by the attack or the defense, the opposition. The second man will come in either with a delayed response and reaction or with a fast reaction. But their ability to decide, should it be quick or should it be delayed, is just world class. It's the best I've seen. So I certainly expect the breakdown battle to be won by Ireland. But, and that could mean that they can slow the All Blacks down somewhat. And if you can slow down the All Blacks, it becomes a lot easier to win that game. Conversely, can the All Blacks slow down the Irish ball? It's going to be interesting. There's a huge game is needed here from Sam Cane, right? But I just think that the Irish ability to win the ball, ability to disrupt opposition ball, they have the advantage here for sure. Let's talk about the enforcers. So big bodies. The physical exchanges here are going to be super important. And Tyke Byrne came down to New Zealand and just looked like a dominant presence. Peter O'Mahony doesn't mind the niggle, really getting in the face of the Scottish Finn Russell last week. But, these guys are enforcers and they really set the tone for the forward pack. I'd even add Andrew Porter to some degree, as I mentioned before. Real warrior, does his job, and enforces through success that he has with his own role. But if I look at this from a physical exchanges perspective, the inclusion of Shannon Frizzell for the All Blacks is massive, right? We've seen him evolve into more of the Jerome Kano type player. We've seen him now really trust his physical presence and back it. And we've seen him do it in a way which is a lot less likely to give away penalties and cards. So I think Shannon Frizzell is massive for the All Blacks. And having him in and having him fit is huge. And I like the makeup of this All Blacks pack as a result, right? Scott Barrett is providing, a huge engine, able to really get stuck in for the full amount of the game, provide a bit of X factor and go forward, and really rip in defense as well. So this is going to be box office. The matchup between Peter O'Mahony and Shannon Frizzell is going to be huge. And O'Mahony, congratulations to him in his 100th game, is going to really want to stamp his authority. And I think Shannon Frizzell can do the same. In terms of where I give the advantage, I actually give it to the All Blacks on this occasion. I just think, a couple of these guys, uncompromising, they've got real swagger now, sort of youthful confidence. And maybe age is a factor here as well. I think on the one hand, there's experience on the side of the Irish, but on the other side, I just think that perhaps this New Zealand younger forward pack could find some advantages there. And in the physical exchanges, Shannon Frizzell, I think, can really get over the gain line. Moving on, X Factor. Two of the most athletic number 8s in the world, slightly smaller than your traditional sort of large big body number 8, but make up for it with super athleticism and go forward and just an ability to keep going and keep going and keep going. Ardie Savea and Caelan Doris, that matchup is going to be huge, and I'm really looking forward to it. Scott Barrett, we've seen, he can play big minutes now, moving from lock into number 6, and I expect that's what will happen in this game, that when Sam Whitelock comes on, it's likely Sam Cane that will drop off, let's say, or definitely Shannon Frizzell and Sam Cane will drop off, and they'll bring Scott Barrett in at number 6 and Dalton Papali'i in at number 7, is how I think they'll play the rotation. So Scott Barrett is going to be a huge person in this game because he's got to cover so much, but we know that he has a big motor. We know that he's very athletic as well, able to score tries, able to finish tries, able to do the rough stuff. That's as X factor as it gets. Ardie Savea, we know with ball in hand, 7's background, electric, absolutely electric. I've put in Andrew Porter here, which might seem like a bit of an odd one, but I'm an Andrew Porter fan, I'll be honest, guys. But his ability just to play big minutes provides some sort of X factor there as well. I just think he's such a safe, real rock of a stalwart that he impacts the game in big ways as a result of that slight difference where he can go for long minutes and he can be trusted to do the job for a long period of time. That's a real luxury for a team, and I've called it X Factor in this occasion because I just think it's super important to the outcome of this game. In terms of where I give X Factor, in terms of the ratings, I give it to the All Blacks. Moving on. Game management. Now, Jamison, Gibson, Park, and Johnny Sexton, obviously the best 9-10 combination in the world. Aaron Smith with all of his experience is going to be super important for the All Blacks. And Richie Mo'unga, with this sort of more cooler head game management style, also important to the All Blacks. As I mentioned, 9-10 for Ireland, best in the world. And I mean that in respect of they understand the system. They exploit and play their own system perfectly, and Johnny Sexton has been sort of the tip of the spear in terms of this Irish renaissance over the last, 8 years, 9 years, and has sort of just become that stalwart in terms of running the system that they exploit. So he is super important to Ireland's chances and to game management in general. When I look at the All Blacks side, we've seen a number of variations to their game management. We've seen that first game in New Zealand in the Irish series. Aaron Smith did a lot more of the game management by passing to sort of second channel rather than one at the ruck or to the first receiver and Richie Mo'unga. A lot more ownership on Aaron Smith to manage the game in that game, and they had great success. Now that was shut down very quickly by the Irish in game 2, but I do think if the All Blacks can sort of elect to go a bit more that way and maybe a bit more variation, maintain the Richie Mo'unga and Beauden Barrett each side of the ruck type first receiver options, but every now and again mix it in with Aaron Smith's ability to find the third man. When you've got variation in your attack like that, you can slow down what is a very, very good rush defense from the Irish, because they're having to consider a number of different options the ball could come from and having to shut down a number of different pictures that you're painting for the defensive line. So how they structure and how they manage as yet remains to be seen. We know that the Richie Mo'unga, Beauden Barrett, dual access first receivers is the favourite option. But if Aaron Smith can stamp a bit more of his mark on this game by being that game manager as well and interchanging between those three options for game management, I think that's going to present some real issues for the Irish. I give game management to Ireland because of the cohesion, the system, and their ability to stick to their system. But I do think New Zealand has some really interesting options, the All Blacks do. If they can exploit them, then they can have great success. Moving on, territory is going to be an interesting one. So this is one thing I think Ireland does exceedingly well, right, is that if it does get drawn into a kicking duel, they've got the likes of James Lowe with just that huge boot to put teams on the back foot. They know when to kick the ball and to exploit space. They target space very, very well. I think the All Blacks, conversely, they've had some challenges in terms of the decision-making and the exits. I'll probably put some of that on Beauden Barrett. I think some of the tactical kicking has been poor as well from Beauden Barrett, and there were a lot of calls for Beauden Barrett to be, replaced by Damien McKenzie because of that point. Some aimless kicks, not really All Black rugby, but in saying that, right, the All Blacks have other skills. Their short kicking game is very, very good. Kick pass, very, very good. Geordie Barrett can do it. Beauden Barrett can do it. Chips in behind the defence. Geordie Barrett does that a lot. Beauden Barrett does that a lot. I think there's a number of ways that the All Blacks can exploit their own kicking game. I think where the big concern for the All Blacks is their decision-making around exits. We've seen Beauden Barrett sort of stumble through that. Every now and again, we see the All Blacks try and take the line on from their own 22. And in this game, that will be a death snail, right? Trying to run the ball out from goal. This All Blacks team have to stay composed, they have to boot for territory, and they have to try and exploit and win space in behind this Irish team. If they do anything less than that, Ireland will gain sufficient territory advantage, they'll put the pressure on the All Blacks, they'll exploit errors, and they will score points. We've seen it so many times from this Irish team. So it's really incumbent on the All Blacks to keep cool heads, to stick to their systems, to boot the ball when they need to, right? And to play lower risk rugby. So important. Where I do think the All Blacks are likely to target in terms of territory is contestable kicks. I think we're going to see Will Jordan, Beauden Barrett, Geordie Barrett really target in behind the rush defence, right? So I think a lot of these sort of mid-range kicks will be just enough that if you can sort of put a high ball up for a Will Jordan, targeting in behind Bundy Aki or, Gary Ringrose, their rush defense has to pause for a second. So what it is, it's another option to provide variation in your attack to keep the defenses guessing, right? If you rush out of the line and there's space in behind, and that's exploited with a contestable kick, right? You're going to stop rushing out of the line. So I think it's something that we've seen from Will Jordan. Beauden Barrett puts this little chip kick over the top, and Will Jordan just rushes through to take that, and he's had great success at that. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Who I think wins this battle right now, I give the edge to Ireland. They've proven it in big games. They maintain composure, right? The All Blacks have a couple of real frailties, and decision-making in the exits is going to be a huge one. But they may be able to exploit some space, as I say, with those mid-range kicking games and contestable kicks. Let's see how that plays out, but that can very easily turn into a territory advantage if they're able to win some of those contestable kicks. We've seen that from the All Blacks in this the last couple of years, the last 12 months in particular. There are real opportunities there, I think, as well. Let's move on to the centre pairing. So, Bundee Aki, probably the man of the tournament so far for me, in just great form, fantastic with ball in hand, crash ball, and very well organised in defence. I think between he and Gary Ringrose, there's just a real understanding of how this team wants to defend, and they do it so expertly. Everyone talks about this being a rush defence from Ireland. I see it more as a drift defence, right? So managing space and pushing defenders into certain space, but with a shooter who rushes out the line. The likes of Gary Ringrose or Bundee Aki covering in to get in the eye line of the attack and really disrupt the opposition as a result. So it's not a traditional rush defense. It's a very smart option of drifting and shooting that they do expertly. On the other side, the All Blacks have been questioned for their passive nature of their defense. So the All Blacks use a lot more of a drift defense, but try to really force teams out to the sideline to negate, how much they can exploit the edges. The likes of Reiko Ioane is really important to that because of his pace. He's able to cover space by really, allowing players a bit more breadth outside him and then closing down that space with his speed. Now, I still see that as quite passive defense. I think passive is the right word. And a team like Ireland, they really thrive on front foot ball. So if you give them an opportunity to keep recycling the ball and get space in their attack, they're very, very difficult to slow down. So I give the advantage in defence, obviously, to Ireland. But the All Blacks need to find ways to impact the cohesion of this Irish team. So I think Reiko Ioane is going to be one of the most important people in this game, both in attack and defence. He's going to have to really cover a lot of space and trust his pace to do so. If you allow the Irish team, who loves to play with width, to really exploit the edges, they're going to score points. Right? They're going to get breaks and they're going to score points. So it's really important that Reiko Ioane shut that down. But the edge I give here to Ireland. Go forward. So we have some big bodies here. We spoke about Bundee Aki, his ability to get over the gain line. Geordie Barrett is a big body, right? So he's almost as tall as Scott Barrett, I think. So, really big body there in the midfield. I think in terms of his contestability in the high ball, that's going to be a really interesting, if they can exploit that in behind Bundee Aki. I think there's some great options there. But the go forward here from the likes of James Lowe and Lester Fainga'anuku is going to be so telling. James Lowe, I think, is a player who has a high work rate and gets involved. It's one of the innovations that we see from Ireland is you'll see both wingers pop up on both sides. And there's a beautiful example of it, I think, recently with Jamison Gibson Park when he was covering wing, covering on one side, involved in the action, and then gets up off the deck, sprints to the other wing to contribute, right? Ireland have probably been the most innovative of that. It was the first I've sort of really noticed it, was under the Irish attacking patterns. And so James Lowe and Mac Hansen, to a degree, have very, very high work rates. James Lowe brings his physicality as well. Lester Fainga'anuku needs to do the same, right? He needs to be impactful in this game. He needs to go looking for work, and he needs to get busy in and around the ruck, where he can really draw in both defenders and the forwards and give opportunities for exploiting space to the back line. So in terms of the go forward from the backline perspective, we know that Bundee Aki will go forward and find gaps. We know that James Lowe will give them high work rate and go forward. We know that Geordie Barrett can do that, and we know that Reiko Ioane with his pace can find weak shoulders very often and get over the advantage line. Lester Fainga'anuku, his challenge, he has to get involved and he has to lift his work rate. Really, really important. In terms of the go forward, this one I would split. I mean, Bundyaki has been fantastic this World Cup, and we have no in quantity, so I probably give the slight edge to Ireland. But if Whainganuku can be impactful, we saw him as the top player in Super Rugby there. Great effort. If he can play the Super Rugby level in international level, the All Blacks will win that battle. But right now, I give Ireland the edge. Moving on the finishes. Now, this is a really interesting look because what you've got here is, Ireland play within a system. They play it expertly. James Lowe, Mac Hansen, Hugo Keenan are perfect finishers under that system. But in terms of X factor, individual skills, ability to create, I give the edge to the All Blacks. But this is a real dynamic and this dynamic is present throughout a number of these matchups. It's a team-based system that's perfectly executed versus individual brilliance under the All Blacks. Now, which side would you favour in that example? And feel free to comment that below. I've seen enough from this Irish team to know that they are super effective when these players are on the end of a cohesive system. Now, we've spoken a lot about ability to disrupt go forward, ability to disrupt breakdown, ability to recycle quickly, ability to get front foot ball. This is where these teams benefit. So I think if this comes down to a real nail-biter physical exchange, which I think it will, I think the importance of individual X factor will be really, really important. Could be the deciding factor here. If Ireland are able to get everything their own way, play at their own tempo, get front foot ball, and they're not slowed down by the All Blacks forwards, then the systems that these players work in are going to be the more important factor. I'm going to give the slight edge here, though, to the All Blacks. I just think that Whainganuku's ability to break tackles and Will Jordan's ability to just score tries out and outright might give the All Blacks a slight edge here. But there's a lot of factors at play here in terms of their effectiveness. But I'll give the slight edge here to the All Blacks. And the game breakers, we've covered this to some degree. Mac Hansen himself is a great finisher. He's almost in that, he's just a high work rate player, very quick and great decision maker. He is under an injury cloud, so that's going to be a real concern. And I think his injury is probably the most concerning of all. I mean, in terms of, I think it was a hamstring or a knee. It was a hamstring, I believe. That's something that could pop up again. So we'll keep an eye on that. And fingers crossed, no injuries, because we want the best possible battle that we can get here. But in terms of the game breakers, Will Jordan is probably up there with, with some of the best game breakers in the game. And his ability just to score tries and pop up in the right spots. I've spoken about contestable high kicks, which I expect them to do. Leicester Whainganuku's ability to break tackles, it's going to be so telling. I've got a little feeling here around, what we'll see from the All Blacks. The All Blacks are great at identifying wing talent and really showcasing that in the big games at World Cups. Now, we've seen it a little bit from Will Jordan, probably more from Damien McKenzie at the moment, but I've just got a feeling there could be a breakout game here, a Nehem Milner Scudder-like breakout game. And I'm expecting either Whainganuku or Will Jordan could satisfy that role, but I'm thinking Whainganuku could have a big game here. So in terms of the game breakers, I give the edge to the All Blacks. And in terms of who I think is going to be really impactful in this game, I've spoken a lot about him. Whainganuku is who I'm picking. One thing to look out for in Whainganuku, though, is he can get caught out in space, and Ireland are perfect at exploiting space. We saw it against Uruguay. He got pulled in slightly, didn't have the pace to cover that wing, and was exposed out on the outer wing by the Uruguayan winger. So Ireland will see that, and there'll be opportunities there for them. And they'll be looking to exploit space in and behind Whainganuku. So it's going to be really interesting if he can defend that. But in terms of out-and-out game breakers, I give the edge to the All Blacks. And in terms of the substitutes, now, interesting selections. Certainly experienced players here in the Irish team. And this team, we've spoken a lot about the Irish systems. The substitutes just slot perfectly into that. So the likes of Conor Murray, Jack Conan, Jack Crowley as well, if he's called upon, able to slot into the system and just provide expert cover there. So you know what you're going to get to a degree from this Irish team. What's exciting, somewhat risky in terms of the All Black selections, is there's an ability to change the picture slightly here from this All Black selection. It's a really interesting selection, actually. So if we look at the likes of Dane Coles versus Samisoni Tokiaho, Coles brings experience. He brings a ruggedness. And, both players are very, very good with ball in hand. Dan Colson tends to pop up on the wings and score tries. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. Now, to Mighty Williams, his inclusion, as well as Finlay Cristiano, a lot of you guys are not happy with that in terms of Cam Roigard. But they were selected because their ability, their athleticism, and ability to close in the space around the ruck. Fozzie has said it himself. He's expecting players in motion, a lot of activity in and around the ruck. He believes horses for courses. To Mighty Williams provides a better athleticism and defense around the ruck, and so too does Finlay Christie. Okay, I'm going to argue the point. I understand the logic, right? I still would have preferred a Cam Roigard because I think the All Blacks should favour more defense, going after and winning the game more than trying to defend the game. That just doesn't seem to be in the All Black ethos for me. But anyway, so those are interesting selections. A younger selection as well from a front row perspective into Mighty Williams and Fletcher Newell. Hopefully the likes of Dan Coles can keep them in line. But it was interesting they went with Mighty Williams as opposed to Ofa Tu'ungafasi there for his experience. They've certainly gone with experience in Sam Whitelock. Obviously the most experienced All Black now in terms of his number of tests. And Dalton Papali'i is a known quantity there. From the backline perspective, Damien McKenzie is in. A lot of people are happy with that. What I'll say about Damien McKenzie is he is really able to change the picture that the All Blacks are presenting in attack, right? We know how good he is with the ball in hand. We know how he can exploit space and gaps and will take the line on himself as well. He's also very composed, I think, comparatively to a lot of these players where, Richie Mo'unga can seem rushed and can be pressured. Beauden Barrett as well can be pressured. Damien McKenzie is one of those players that just seems to always have a lot of time. Anton Lienert-Brown is there. I think what he really will bring is animation in terms of his work rate, in terms of getting the ball and rushing forward, right? So I'm okay with the selection. I understand the logic, right? One thing I will say is famously we saw Sonny Bill Williams brought on in the 2015 World Cup final, brought on just after halftime. And that change of picture really changed that game. So the offload to Ma'anonu shortly after the half of that try, the All Blacks went on a run. To their credit, Australia started to come back, but the All Blacks had done enough there. That's really the benefit of changing the picture to the defense and in terms of your attack, right? It's hugely beneficial, but it sometimes needs time to work, right? So what I would like to see here is Damien McKenzie used for a minimum of 30 minutes. If he's interjected somewhere at 45 minutes, 50 minutes, I think that's a huge statement. As I say, it changes the picture that the All Blacks are presenting to Ireland, and I think those subtle changes can have big impact in swaying momentum in a game. So the substitutes, I give the edge to the All Blacks. And with that, guys, now I'm going to give you my prediction. I've covered a number of different areas, a number of different factors. A lot of these areas are super close, and I've given a slight advantage each way. I think if I was to summarize this all in terms of the advantages, I think the underrated All Blacks forward pack is as cohesive as I've seen. I think Ireland will win the breakdown battle and have their own success. I think the All Blacks can win set piece and the physical exchanges. I really do. I think there's enough in this lineup they can have a real impactful, make a statement in those physical exchanges. Now, what was interesting to me against the Springboks for Ireland is that those physical exchanges were not won, right? Exactly what I'm talking about now is what Ireland faced against the Springboks. But they were still able to have moments of success. The odd scrum that they were able to win, scrum penalties, winning the ball when, in terms of the breakdown and the jackal work, when South Africa were able to get over the gain line continually. They looked like a team that were losing the physical exchanges and the set-piece exchanges, but did enough to halt momentum against the Springboks and really sort of turn momentum back in their favour. And that's a skill that the Irish team have, is they're either super cohesive or they're dangerous enough when they're not cohesive to turn momentum or stop momentum. I expect that to play out here. I think the All Blacks can get ascendancy and can get success in the forwards, but I think Ireland can do just enough to disrupt things. So that's going to be really interesting on how they exploit it. From a backline perspective, Ireland work within a system, and their game managers are experts at doing that. And that's both in managing territory, in managing the cohesiveness of their attack, in managing the defensive structure, and in managing scoreboard pressure. So all of those factors we give in favour of Ireland. And they've proven it over a 17-game win streak, and they've proven it over a period of success of now 6, 7, 8 years, right, on the trot. The All Blacks have game breakers, X factor, unlike many other teams in the world. Unlike any team in the world, I should say, right? And if they can really be smarter around limiting risk and playing in a way that leverages, their advantages in terms of X factor, and players like Whainganuku really having impactful presence in terms of his work rate, then the All Blacks can find their own moments of success. And the All Blacks have something that's referred to as the turbo button as well, right? We saw it in action in Ireland, in the New Zealand series against Ireland. There's a 10-minute, 15-minute period where the All Blacks can just throw tries, 3 tries, 2 tries, out of nowhere, and that's the benefit of having X factor and getting reward for dominance that you present, whether it be in the forwards or in the backs. So, all of that to say, what is my prediction? And let's go back to the original statements that I made around the probability of success. Right? This is going to be closer than people think. And I can see a blowout either way because Ireland have been so good and All Blacks have, the turbo button able to score points are always dangerous and threatening. Now, ultimately, who do I think is going to win this game? I think the All Blacks will win this game, guys. And I think it's going to be close. But I just get a sense that this All Blacks team is super confident. They have a couple of little inclusions there, the likes of Joe Smith that we haven't really spoken about, that will be getting them up for this game, right? And now they've got a couple of key players back in terms of the forward pack, and the makeup of this forward pack looks good. Now, if they can leverage their advantages with the X factor, they can score points, then they can pull away in this game. And I'm expecting that's what will happen in this game. But this is just me deciding on paper. Anything can happen on the day. And you know what? I'm super excited for this game. And I wish the Irish fans and Ireland team all the best in this because, I love the All Blacks. I support the All Blacks. But I'm also a rugby fan. And what we've seen from this Irish team is some of the best rugby you will ever see, right? This is one of the most dominant periods in Irish rugby. And they have been one of the most dominant teams in world rugby. But this is a one-off match. And the All Blacks have their back against the wall. And they have a point to prove in this one. They're confident. They're fresh. And they want revenge. And I think that's going to be enough to give the All Blacks the edge. I'm going to leave it there, guys. Detailed review, that one. A lot of detail covered. And I really appreciate you sticking with me. If you've made it to the end, I would appreciate it if you could just hit like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you agree with and disagree with. But most of all, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review and I hope you enjoy the game. I'll be back after the match to debrief it all with you guys. And until then, enjoy the rugby, guys. See you later.